you've never once seen the world as it is. Not the tree outside, not the face across the table, not even your own hand held up to the light. What you call seeing is closer to composing. A silent craft your mind performs so quickly, so reliably, you mistake the edit for the original. Space pours in like a grid. Time marches across the scene like a conductor's baton. Causes line up with effects and tell you a story about why things happen the way they do. And because this assembly never slips, you trust it the way a newborn trusts a heartbeat. Absolutely. Now imagine the dread and the thrill of discovering that the trust is misplaced, not because the world is fake, but because your access to it is filtered. Not because there's nothing out there, but because there's more out there than the tools you're using can ever reach. That's where today's journey begins, in the gap between how reality works and how your mind presents it. And it's here that a fiercely unsentimental thinker, Arthur Schopenhauer, makes a claim that sounds like a riddle. The one window that actually looks behind the picture is the same one you use to lift a glass, clench a fist, or feel your hunger. Your body isn't just another thing in the room. It's the doorway that swings both ways, one side opening onto images, the other onto something that has no image at all, will. Before we step through, think about the last time you felt a surge of effort before any thought. You didn't reason yourself into moving. You moved, and then the reasons showed up afterward, tidy and articulate. That raw thrust is what Schopenhauer wants to name. It isn't a polite wish or a line of dialogue in your head. It's the engine under the hood, the push that makes a seed split or a storm gather. And here's the twist that makes his philosophy stick in your mind. He doesn't think that engine belongs only to you. He thinks it's the inner reality of everything, showing itself in you on the only channel you can feel directly. If that sounds grand, it is. If it sounds dark, it's that too. Because once you admit there's a single force pressing through every living thing, you have to explain why the surface looks like a civil war. Why do needs collide? Why does life feed on life? Why do we wake up into a world that feels at times like a contest we didn't ask to enter? Schopenhauer's answer is ruthless and oddly consoling. The conflict belongs to the appearance, to the way your mind slices the seamless into parts and pits them against each other. Underneath, he says, there is only one current. The fight is a mask the current wears when it passes through the stage lights of space and time. This is not a bedtime story. It's a framework that makes immediate demands. If the division is a feature of how things show up and not of what they are, then your neighbor's wound isn't foreign matter. It's your own inner nature, refracted. Compassion stops being charity. It becomes accuracy. Beauty stops being luxury. It becomes oxygen, brief relief from the grinding press of wanting and fearing. Even self-restraint reads differently. Not prudishness, but a small ceasefire in a war the will wages with itself. By the end, you won't be asked to agree with every inch of the vision. You'll be asked to try on a lens. Use it once on a headline, on a stranger, on a private decision, and notice what shifts. If the world on stage is a brilliant construction, and if the heartbeat behind the curtains is one and the same in you and everything you meet, then the oldest question gets a new edge. Knowing this, how do you want to act? Kant's revolution is easy to miss because it doesn't blow up the world. It rearranges the furniture in your head. He says, you don't find space and time out there the way you stumble upon a coastline. You bring them to experience as forms of intuition. Every out there you encounter is shaped by these forms from the start, which means your knowledge is never a raw harvest, it's a cooked meal. That's why the tree you see is unquestionably real as phenomenon, as something that shows up within the structure of space, time, and causality. But the thing in itself remains beyond reach. You can't step outside your mind to check whether the picture matches the original, because the stepping outside would itself be staged within the same mind-bound conditions you're trying to escape. That sounds abstract until you test it against ordinary certainty. Think of causality. You never literally see cause the way you see color. You apply it as a rule that connects events. This cracked because that struck. Your confidence in the chain comes not from catching causation red-handed, but from the mind's law that events must line up as cause and effect to be intelligible at all. Kant's point isn't that the world is unreal. It's that intelligibility has a price. Whatever can be known must pass through the forms that make knowing possible. This move splits reality into two registers: phenomena, what appears under the forms and can be known; measured, debated, refined, noumena, the thing in itself, the reality as it is apart from the forms that make it appear to us. You live your entire life in the phenomenal world. Science thrives there. Common sense operates there. Ethics is argued there. The noumenal is not a ghost world, it's the name for the limit of your access. And that limit matters, because it prevents you from pretending your view is a God's eye snapshot. There is no humanly available God's eye. There is only the eye you have, with the lenses you can't take off. So what do you do with a limit you can't cross? Kant's answer is discipline. You stop asking for impossible knowledge and hone the knowledge you can have. You build rigorous methods for the phenomenal world and refuse to smuggle metaphysics back in as fake certainty. It's a bracing, adult move, but it leaves a longing intact. Is there any hint, any whisper of what the thing in itself is like? Kant's official line is no. The border guards are strict. Your intuitions don't travel there. Your categories, cause, substance, necessity, don't apply there. You're fenced in, and that fence is exactly what keeps knowledge honest. Enter Schopenhauer. He takes Kant's architecture seriously and makes no attempt to bulldoze the fence. Instead, he looks for a gate. If you can't look at the thing in itself from the outside, maybe you can feel it from the inside. He notices that your body is given to you in a way that no other object is, not only as an appearance in space and time, but as immediate inner activity, effort, drive, impulse. He calls that inner side will, and claims it isn't just your private power source, it's the form in which the thing in itself discloses itself at all. The gate he proposes is daring and precise, self-awareness as a wedge into metaphysics, and that wedge will pry open everything that follows. Stand a few steps back from yourself, and you'll notice a strange dual exposure. On one layer, your body is an exhibit: height, weight, motion, location. Doctors measure it, cameras capture it, strangers infer things about it. That's the body as representation, the outward show fully inside space, time, and cause. On a second, simultaneous layer, you don't merely observe the body, you inhabit it. The effort of lifting, the ache that arrives before a sentence forms, the hunger that bends attention toward food without asking your permission. These aren't pictures you look at, they are pressures you are. That's the body as will, not a thought about doing, but doing before thought. Schopenhauer seizes on this duality with both hands. If the outside is phenomenon, what Kant mapped, and the inside is immediate, no distance, no inference, then the body does something no other object does for you. It gives you a double passport. You can describe your arm as a length in space, and you can feel it as an urge carried through muscle and nerve. You can time a heartbeat, and you can be the pulsing. This is the narrow door, because it's narrow indeed. You only ever feel the will directly here, in this living system you call mine. Everywhere else, animals, people, even plants and storms, you infer the inner from the outer. But if the inner you feel is the thing in itself showing up in its own voice, then you've caught metaphysics in the act. From that single foothold, Schopenhauer makes his central inference. What if the inner of everything is will? The way your inner is will. The outward appearances differ wildly. Teak tree, gray wolf, river, violinist. But the inner pressure, the striving, the mute insistence to be and to do, could be one in kind. That could matters. He isn't pretending to feel the hunger of a hawk with the same immediacy he feels his own. He's extending the only immediate knowledge available his to explain the uniformity of behavior he sees striving everywhere. This leap might sound like poetry unless you check it against experience. Think of fatigue. You don't start with a theory of energy depletion and then decide to rest. You sag. Later, the story catches up. I'm tired because... Think of anger. Thought arrives, like an apologetic friend who shows up after the fight to explain what happened. Or think of creative urgency. The idea presses forward first. And then, if you're lucky, language finds a way to carry it. In all these cases, the will is not a concept. It's the lived push from which concepts take their cues. And the narrow door doesn't open only onto human interiors. Watch a vine search for light, a swarm reorganize after disruption, a bird hammer at a seed beyond what looks rational for the calories in play. The behaviors are outward. The inference is inward. The pattern is the same, a drive that precedes any story about it. Schopenhauer's claim is not that will speaks in words or aims at moral ends. It wants nothing in particular. It wants to want. That's why he will later say that desire saturates existence and relief is temporary. The will pushes, finds a momentary satisfaction, and pushes again. You've lived this loop 1,000 times: anticipation, attainment, anticlimax. Seen this way, your body stops being merely the shell you're stuck in. It becomes the translator between two orders. The order of appearance, where everything is countable and causally entangled, and the order of inner force, where there is no before and after, no here and there, only pressure. The door is narrow, but it opens onto a view big enough to replot ethics, beauty, and the meaning of restraint. Step through, and the rest of the system starts to rearrange itself in the light of a single insight. What you are inside is what everything is. In its depth, a will that moves before any word is spoken. Stand in a crowded square and let your attention widen. Dozens of bodies move past, each a bundle of goals. Someone hurries to work, someone lingers at a cafe, someone checks their phone for the 100th time. From the outside, these are distinct objects, individuals. From the inside, Schopenhauer says, they are masks worn by the same actor. The reason they look separate is not because the underlying reality is fractured, but because your mind, remember Kant's forms, forces every perception into the frames of space and time. Multiplicity is a byproduct of those frames. Unity is what lies beneath them. This is where Schopenhauer reaches for the phrase principium individuation, is the principle of individuation. It's a mouthful, but the meaning is simple. Space and time carve up the seamless into parts. A single will flows through reality, but once refracted into spatio-temporal grids, it appears as discrete beings with discrete interests. Think of light through a prism. One beam enters, many colors spill out. You mistake the rainbow for multiple sources. The truth is one source, many appearances. The implication is radical. Conflict, the feeling that the world is crowded with competing wills, isn't built into reality itself. It's the cost of representation. The subject-object split, the categorization of here versus there, now versus then, self versus other, creates the illusion of opposition. But underneath the stage lights, the same current is pressing forward. Schopenhauer calls that current simply will, not benevolent, not malevolent, not moral, not teleological, just blind striving, endlessly manifesting. This explains why every domain of nature, from galaxies down to microbes, displays the same rhythm: birth, growth, hunger, reproduction, decay. It isn't that each thing has its own private essence. It's that each thing is a local costume for the universal will. The differences we catalog, species, identities, characters, are real in the phenomenal world, but superficial compared to the metaphysical unity beneath. Your neighbor's striving, the tree's growth, the river's erosion. All of it is one movement refracted into different masks. But if the will is one, why do we feel so bitterly the fracture? Because we're trapped inside the forms of cognition. We can't unsee space and time. We can't flip a switch and experience unity directly. We can only infer it from the narrow door of our body, and then extend the inference. That's why philosophy matters here. It doesn't give you mystical ecstasy on demand. It teaches you to reinterpret what you see, to hold in mind that the multitude on stage is a performance of the single current backstage. This doesn't erase the urgency of daily life. Hunger still bites, fear still jolts the heart, desire still surges. What changes is your framework for understanding them. The antagonism isn't ultimate, it's relative. Beneath predator and prey, rival and rival, lover and beloved, lies the same undifferentiated push. That realization won't stop conflict from occurring, but it can change how you live inside it. The fight is not between truly alien forces. It is the will colliding with itself under the illusion of separateness. And here lies both the dark tone and the strange consolation of Schopenhauer. The dark. There's no escape from the will's blind pressure. It will manifest endlessly until it denies itself. The consolation: you are not alone, not isolated, not an alien spark in a hostile void. You are of the same essence as everything else. The masks differ. The current is one. Transition. Yet when you stop theorizing and look at the world, the unity is hard to believe, because what you see everywhere is suffering. Schopenhauer insists on a blunt starting point: to exist is to suffer. That claim is not rhetorical flourish. It's a conclusion drawn from observation. He tells a story that sticks in the mind like a nightmare. On the island of Java, sea turtles crawl ashore to lay eggs. As they dig and strain, wild dogs flip them on their backs and tear into their soft underbellies, eating them alive. Then, in a brutal twist, tigers leap on the dogs. The cycle repeats endlessly, year after year. There's no moral here, no lesson, just pain as the background noise of life. This is not cherry-picking. For Schopenhauer, nature is a battlefield disguised as scenery. The wolf's teeth, the rabbit's terror, the parasite's feast, the tree's endless fight for sunlight. Each example shows the same rhythm, a push to preserve life and extend it colliding with other pushes, trying to do the same. And this is not limited to the animal world. Even plants suffer, stretching and contorting for light, often to be smothered by their neighbors. The will to live creates the very conditions of conflict. Every being wants, therefore every being collides. Notice the timing of Schopenhauer's insight. He was writing decades before Darwin, yet he observed what evolutionary theory would later formalize: self-preservation and reproduction dominate life. He calls this the will to life, a name that captures both the instinctive push and the futility. Life strains to continue, but continuation means only more striving, more conflict, more pain. The will doesn't aim at peace. It aims at persistence, which guarantees struggle. For us humans, the pattern is just as relentless. Hunger, ambition, jealousy, fear, lust, each desire gnaws until fed, and once fed, another desire rises. Think of the anticlimax of reaching a goal: the diploma in hand, the job secured, the love returned. Relief is temporary. Restlessness returns because the will doesn't stop, it only shifts targets. Satisfaction is a pause, not an end. Life becomes a pendulum swinging between want and boredom, each painful in its own way. That's why Schopenhauer describes existence as a vale of tears. At first glance, this looks like pure pessimism, a philosophy of despair. But look closer. Schopenhauer isn't inventing the suffering. He's naming it. His honesty is what gives his later ethics its force. By refusing to gloss over the cruelty of the world, he makes compassion more urgent. If life were bliss, kindness would be optional. If life is torment, kindness is survival. And yet, the metaphysics still matter. Why is there suffering at all? If the will is one, because suffering is a feature of representation, where unity fractures into multiplicity. The undivided will manifests as individuals who then clash. Conflict is not a property of reality in itself. It's the shadow cast when unity is filtered through space and time. Predator and prey are one essence split into two roles. The horror is real in the phenomenal world. But metaphysically, the wolf and the rabbit are the same current at war with itself. That's why Schopenhauer calls ignorance of unity the greatest mistake. We live as if we are separate beings locked in endless competition, and so we sharpen teeth, hoard resources, and strike first. But if we remembered what philosophy reveals, that beneath the masks there is one will, the attitude would change. The first step in that change is ethics. If the battle is self against self, then harming others is harming yourself. Compassion isn't soft morality, it's metaphysical realism. Transition. And so we arrive at the practical question: if life is suffering and unity is hidden, what should we actually do? Philosophy, for Schopenhauer, isn't an armchair game. If the world is will, and if suffering is its constant music, then ethics isn't a luxury, it's an emergency response. He identifies two paths that open once you see the truth: compassion and asceticism. The other is so extreme it belongs mostly to saints. The first path is compassion. Why compassion? Because once you understand that the inner essence is shared, harming another is not just cruelty, it's metaphysical confusion. You're striking yourself in disguise. The German word for compassion, Mitleid, literally means suffering with. To feel with another is not sentimentality, it's recognizing that their pain and yours come from the same well. When you ease their suffering, you lighten the burden of the will that lives in you too. Schopenhauer sharpens the contrast by attacking selfishness. Selfishness acts as if the principle of individuation, the apparent separation of beings, is absolute. It insists I and you are fundamentally distinct. That illusion justifies cruelty. But the truth, revealed by philosophy, is the opposite: self and other are one. Therefore, selfishness is not just immoral, it is metaphysically false. To persist in it is to deepen the world's torment. To act compassionately is to honor the unity hidden beneath appearances. This doesn't mean Schopenhauer romanticizes love in all its forms. He distinguishes between eros, which is desire-based and ultimately selfish, and agape, which is selfless sympathy. Eros wants, agape shares. Only the latter, for him, counts as true love. All other affections are rooted in the will's push to reproduce and preserve itself, and thus tangled with selfishness. Pure compassion is rare, but it's the mark of moral clarity. The second path is asceticism. And here Schopenhauer raises the stakes. If the will is the source of suffering, then the highest ethical move is to deny the will. Ascetics practice radical self-denial. Celibacy, fasting, renunciation of pleasures. The logic is brutal but consistent. To gratify the will is to participate in its endless cycle of suffering. To refuse it is to weaken its grip. The ascetic ideal is embodied, in his mind, by figures like the Buddha, Jesus, Saint Francis of Assisi, individuals who saw through the illusion of individuation so deeply that they could withdraw their own desires almost completely. Of course, Schopenhauer admits this is beyond nearly everyone. The will is too strong, too embedded in the body to be silenced entirely. Asceticism remains an unreachable summit for most, a star to navigate by rather than a destination to reach. But its existence proves the metaphysical point. It is possible, at least for some, to live with the will denied. For the rest of us, compassion remains the workable ethic, an everyday refusal to deepen suffering by recognizing the unity of life beneath appearances. This twofold path has a simplicity that belies its radicalism. No divine commandments, no elaborate systems of rules, just one insight with two consequences. First, see through the illusion of separateness, and compassion follows. Second, realize the will is the engine of pain, and ascetic denial becomes the ideal. In practice, Schopenhauer doesn't expect humanity to transform into monks, but he insists that even the smallest act of genuine compassion is already a step out of ignorance, already a crack in the illusion, already a hint of freedom from the will's relentless grip. Transition, yet even the most compassionate heart needs relief, a breath outside the storm. Where does Schopenhauer turn for that? To beauty, to art, to the sublime force of nature. If life is driven by a restless will that never stops pressing forward, then every moment of satisfaction is borrowed time. Desire surges, wins its object, collapses into boredom, and surges again. How do you catch your breath inside this cycle? Schopenhauer's answer is art. Beauty is not decoration. It is reprieve, a rare suspension of the will's grip. Think about the last time you stood in front of a painting and lost track of yourself. For those moments, you weren't calculating, hungering, fearing. You were simply absorbed. Schopenhauer calls this state aesthetic contemplation. The key is that your mind stops willing and starts perceiving purely. You're not thinking about what the painting can give you, not craving it, not fearing it. You're freed, however briefly, from being a servant of the will. Why does art have this effect? Because Schopenhauer says, art presents us not with individuals in conflict, but with Platonic ideas, the timeless forms of things. An artist doesn't just paint this hand or that tree. He paints the hand, the tree, the ideal type. Encountering this form lifts you above the messy particularities of the phenomenal world. For a moment, you inhabit a plane beyond competition, beyond striving, beyond the desperate scramble of individual beings. You see the world not as battlefield, but as pattern. Nature can produce the same reprieve, sometimes even more powerfully. The experience of the sublime standing before a mountain range, a vast ocean, a violent storm can dissolve your sense of individuality. Overwhelmed, you feel small, even insignificant. And yet, paradoxically, that very smallness is liberating. For a moment, you stop clinging to the illusion of separateness. You feel folded into something vast and enduring. Schopenhauer interprets this as another way of glimpsing the unity of the will, a reminder that your private striving is part of a greater whole. But there is one art form that surpasses them all. Music, unlike painting, sculpture, or poetry, music doesn't represent ideas or objects. You can't point to a melody and say, that's a tree or that's a river. Music, Schopenhauer argues, is a direct copy of the will itself. It bypasses representation altogether. That's why music affects us so immediately and so deeply. It speaks the language of our inner nature. A chord progression can move you to tears without a single word, because it vibrates with the same pulse that drives your own being. This is why Schopenhauer claims music is the highest art. It doesn't distract you from the will. It mirrors it in sound. When you listen, you are hearing the rhythm of striving itself. But instead of trapping you in it, music offers catharsis. It's as if the chaos of existence is momentarily reorganized into harmony, giving you both recognition and release. That's why music feels more true than explanation. It bypasses intellect and touches the ground note of your being. For Schopenhauer, art is not escape in the cheap sense. It is escape in the vital sense. A lifting above the storm, a vision of unity, a taste of freedom from the endless hunger of the will. Of course, the reprieve is temporary. The painting fades, the concert ends, the storm subsides, and you're back in the grind of desire. But while it lasts, beauty reveals what philosophy affirms. There is more to life than the struggle. There is pattern, there is unity, there is release. Transition. If philosophy and art together show us this strange mix of suffering, unity, and reprieve, the final question is, what do we make of it all? And how has Schopenhauer's vision echoed through the centuries since? Schopenhauer's philosophy might sound abstract, but its echoes are everywhere in culture. Take music. Richard Wagner, one of the most influential composers of the 19th century, openly credited Schopenhauer with reshaping his operas. He began to emphasize music as the direct expression of inner reality, letting it carry emotional weight even when words fell silent. The lush, relentless flow of Wagner's later works can be heard as a musical embodiment of the will. Then there's Nietzsche. As a young man, he adored Schopenhauer, calling him a spiritual father. Nietzsche's first book, The Birth of Tragedy, is drenched in Schopenhauerian themes. The contrast between the striving, chaotic energy of life, the Dionysian, and the order of appearance, the Apollonian. Later, Nietzsche would break violently with Schopenhauer, rejecting his pessimism and denial of life. But even in rebellion, the shadow remained. Nietzsche's call to embrace life's chaos can be read as the flip side of Schopenhauer's call to renounce it. The ripples extend further. Freud's theory of unconscious drives owes a debt to Schopenhauer's insistence that our motives run deeper than rational thought. Modern psychology's recognition of automatic impulses, blind biases, and subconscious cravings echoes Schopenhauer's picture of the will bubbling beneath intellect. Even environmental philosophy has found him useful. If all beings are expressions of the same will, then cruelty toward animals or exploitation of ecosystems isn't just unkind, it's a failure to see the unity of existence. Of course, not everyone is convinced. Critics charge that Schopenhauer's worldview collapses into despair. If life is suffering, and the will never rests, what's the point? Doesn't his call to asceticism ask too much of ordinary people? Isn't compassion too fragile a foundation for ethics in a world full of violence and greed? Others argue that his metaphysics leans too heavily on inference. Just because your body gives you a double passport doesn't prove that the whole universe is built the same way. His leap from the narrow door to universal will is bold, but not airtight. And then there are personal critiques. Schopenhauer was notoriously difficult in life. Aloof, cynical, prone to harsh judgments. Some biographers suggest that his philosophy reflects not just deep reasoning, but also temperament. Was his pessimism an insight into reality, or a projection of his own melancholy? The line is hard to draw. He himself insisted it was insight, not mood, but the debate continues. Still, what makes Schopenhauer endure is the way he frames the questions. He doesn't offer an easy optimism that life is progress. He doesn't flatter us with stories of divine purpose. He forces us to confront the raw fact of suffering, the relentless push of desire, the illusion of separateness. But he also offers tools, compassion, beauty, even ascetic ideals, that point toward dignity in the face of torment. Whether you agree with his conclusions or not, his lens sharpens the edges of existence. And perhaps that's the lasting challenge. We live in a world still driven by insatiable striving. Economies built on endless growth, social lives organized around competition for attention, technologies designed to amplify desire. Schopenhauer's voice cuts through like a reminder from another age. None of this frenzy will satisfy, because the frenzy itself is the problem. What matters is not piling up more wants, but recognizing the unity beneath them. Compassion, restraint, beauty. These aren't luxuries. They're survival strategies for souls caught in the storm of the will. Transition with all of this in view. The metaphysics, the suffering, the ethics, the aesthetics, the legacy. One final question remains. Where does it leave us? What do we do with Schopenhauer's stark vision in our own lives? At the close of the world, as will and representation, Schopenhauer doesn't leave us with a neat formula or a cheerful finale. He leaves us with a double recognition. The world is at its core restless will, and yet within that recognition lies the possibility of compassion, of beauty, even of peace. He admits the path is narrow, the relief temporary, the ideal ascetic life almost impossible, and yet the insight itself changes everything. Once you see that the line between self and other is an illusion of representation, every act of cruelty becomes self-harm in disguise. Every act of kindness becomes an alignment with truth. Compassion stops being optional morality and becomes metaphysical realism. Once you see that beauty suspends the will, even for a moment, you stop treating art as luxury and start treating it as necessary medicine. Once you feel, even dimly, that music speaks the will's own language, you understand why it pierces so deeply. And once you confront the cycle of desire with honesty, you stop expecting final satisfaction from it. You start looking for ways to live differently, less trapped, less selfish, less blind. Of course, you don't have to agree with Schopenhauer's every claim. You might think his pessimism overshoots, or that his leap from body to cosmos is too daring. You might prefer Nietzsche's exuberant embrace of life's chaos, or Kant's cautious limits on knowledge. But the force of Schopenhauer lies less in winning every argument and more in changing the questions you ask. Instead of, "How do I get what I want?" you begin to ask, "Why is wanting endless?" Instead of, "How do I beat others?" you ask, "What if the other is me in disguise?" Instead of, "How do I escape suffering?" you ask, "What use can I make of compassion and beauty to endure it?" In this sense, Schopenhauer is less a prophet of despair than a teacher of clarity. He doesn't invent the suffering. He names it. He doesn't abolish desire. He unmasks its futility. He doesn't promise heaven. He offers reprieves, moments of compassion, glimpses of unity, the hush of music, the silence of ascetic practice. These are small lights, but they are real. And in a philosophy that refuses to flatter, even small lights matter. So where does that leave us? Perhaps here life will not stop pressing, but you can change your posture toward it. You can act compassionately, knowing the other is not other. You can honor beauty, knowing it suspends the will. You can practice restraint, knowing it lessens the storm. You can remember when the frenzy of desire promises fulfillment, that fulfillment is never final. And you can find dignity, even meaning, in refusing to add to the world's torment. Schopenhauer ends with an image both dark and liberating. When the will finally denies itself, when striving ceases, what remains looks to those still full of will like nothingness. But to those who've glimpsed release, it looks like peace. We need not wait for sainthood to taste that peace. Each act of compassion, each moment of beauty, each refusal to harm, these are small denials of the will, small steps toward clarity, small hints of freedom. The world may be a veil of tears, but through that veil, you can act differently. And that difference, however small, is the gift Schopenhauer leaves, a way to live honestly in the storm, with eyes open, hands gentle, and a heart that suffers with all, because in truth, it is all.